George,
Hello.
Daf Yomi tomorrow will be at 8:30, God willing.
Tomorrow?
8:30 p.m.
Mr. Hashem. I'm ahead of you guys because I do my other Daf Yomi from Israel.
Okay.
But
We're on.
well, I'll be happy to join you guys.
I think we did 108. Correct. We're on 109 tomorrow.
It's good.
Okay. Yeah. Are we on 325? Is that where we left off?
Yes.
I think that's where we left off. Latest time. We talked about the earliest time last time. What's the latest time for Kriya Shema at night? So far, we discussed the earliest time that one may recite Ma'ariv and Kriya Shema. What is the latest time that one may recite them? There's a disagreement among the Tanoim about this question as well. In the same Mishnah that we learned last week. This is Brachas, Me'emasai Korna Shema Ba'arvin. It's the first Mishnah in Shas. When do we start reading Kriya Shema? Mishasha Kohanim Nechlasim Lechol B'Trumoson. From the time when the Kohanim start eating their Truma, Ad Sof Hashmar Rishona. The Laila was divided into 3 Hashmarot until the end of the first Hashmar. Div Rabbi Eliezer. We'll have to determine what it is. Chachamim say until half the night. Not midnight. It's you have to take the time from Tzeis until Nates, or from Shkia until Nates, and divide that in half. Rabbi Gamliel is more makel and says that you can say Kriya Shema all the way until Alos HaShachar. Rabbi Gamliel's sons came from a feast. I guess it ended late, and they told their father we hadn't lain Shema. If it's not Alos HaShachar yet, you're chayav to read. Really, what the Gemara, what the Mishnah is saying here is, whenever the Chachamim say at Chatzos, really make Radin, you could do it until Alos. Chachamim are making a gzeira. They don't want you to miss, so they really tell you to do it at Chatzos. Hekter Chalavim Vevarim. So any korban that you bring, whether it's a chatas, an asham, an ola, a shlamim, so you shecht it. Shechit has to be done during the daytime. You collect the blood in a kli, and you have to be zoyrek the dam. That has to be done in the daytime. Now, at that moment, once you did zrikas adam, that matirs you to eat the meat. If it's a korban olah, no one eats the meat. It matters you to put all the limbs up on the mizbech to burn. If it's a chatas or nosham, male kohanim can eat the meat in the azara. If it's a shlamim, or those korbanos that are like a shlamim, like a bechor, like a meiser, like a pesach, so that can be eaten by anybody, male, female, anywhere in Yerushalayim, within the choimas of Yerushalayim. So the zrikas adam allows you to eat the meat. Now the innards, the intestines, the fat, right? That's called hekter chalavim vevorim. Mitzvosen ad sheyale amud hashachar. They could burn all night. So korbanos like a chatas, an asham, a korban toda, which is a specific type of shlamim, The only difference between a korban toda and a regular shlamim is a shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. Korban toda can only be eaten for 1 day. So any of these korbanos that you only have 1 day to eat, you have to stop eating by alos hashachar, and that's where the chachamim will come in with a gzeira that you could eat, that you have to stop by chatzos. You want to make a gzeira that you avoid missing. In the Gemara, the halacha is decided in accordance with the view of Rabbi Gamliel, which means you could say Kriya Shema Tel Alos HaShachar. Moreover, the Gemara confirms the implication of the Mishnah that even the Chachamim agree that in principle Kriyat Shema may be recited the whole night. They only require reciting by midnight out of concern that delaying may lead to forgetting to say Kriyat Shema altogether. So the Gemara in Brachas on Chet Amud Beis, Tes Amud Aleph grapples with this part of the Mishnah, and Amir Yidamar Shmuel Alach Rabbi Gamliel regarding extending Kriyat Shema to Alos. Then Ma'aseh Shebo B'Anav, the Gemara recounts the story of the sons coming to the father in the middle of the night. So the Gemara asks, what? This is the first time that the sons of Rabbi Gamliel knew about this sheet of Rabbi Gamliel that you have until the morning. They had to come and ask him that night. So the Gemara explains the dialogue this way. Rabbanan pligi alaycha. The sons of Rabbi Gamliel reminded their father that the Chachamim argue with him. The Chachamim say you have to stop by Chatzos. Normally, in a machlokas Chachamim, Yachid v'Rabim halacha karabim. If you have an individual versus multiple people, so the Torah says Achrei Rabim lahatos, it's a democracy. We go after more people. So do we paskin like the Chachamim that we can't say Kriyat Shema because now it's after Chatzos? O Dilma, or perhaps Rabbana Kavos Exfirlu. Maybe really the Chachamim agree with you. And the only reason hide the Kamri at Chatzos is K'nei L'Archi Kadam Avera. It's just a Gzeira that you shouldn't become negligent and forget to say it. And in fact, Rabbi Gamliel answered, Amrlu Rabbanan Kavosi Svirlu. In fact, the Chachamim agree with me. And therefore, he made it obligatory on them to recite it. He agreed exactly with what his sons had told him. That's the Gemara. Now, the Rishonim differ as to whether the stringency of the Chachamim is that accepted as Allah or not. The Rashba writes that since the Gemara rules like Rabbi Gamliel, right, it said clearly, then one is not obligated to recite Kriyat Shema before midnight. That's what the Rashba says. Nearly mikan the ha'oirulu Rabbi Gamliel, that since Rabbi Gamliel paskin that afilu Rabbana moeduba, that the Chachamim agree with him, deloy pligi ala b'lechatchila, she'elu nechla kolav b'ha b'chol makam inu lo v'abdiki yichida, that normally we don't follow an isolated shita. The kivin the ifsek ilchas Rabbi Gamliel. Says the Rashba, since the halacha was passed by Gamliel, alma afilu lechatchila yachol isakev. It's not a b'di'ev dikadin. Lechatchila you can wait until alois. Mili krosat shas muchal alos hashach. However, the Rambam disagrees, ruling that one must recite Kriyat Shema before midnight. According to the Rambam, even Rabbi Gamliel holds that ideally you should recite Shema before midnight. Ezer Zman Kriyat Shema b'layla. Mitzvasa mishas yitzis ha'kechavim ad chatzi alayim. It's from after it says until Chatzos. V'mover v'icher v'karat shelo amar hashachar yotzo yirechovoso. B'di'evad you were yotzei if you read later than Chatzos up until Alois. Shelo amar Chatzos agdei l'archi kadam napshir. The Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah understood the dispute somewhat differently. Their opinion, all agreed that ideally one must recite Kriyat Shema immediately after it says HaKachavim. And the Chachamim and Rabbi Gamliel disagree with respect to what you should do if you didn't recite it immediately after it says. And says the Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah, Bein Chachamim bein Rav Gamliel Kulu Moed L'Chadchil Tzarech L'Kros Miyad B'Tzeis HaKochavim. You should read Kriya Shema right after it says, Teda. You should know that I'm reading the common. We don't want him to come home, eat, drink, fall asleep, and then forget about writing Kriya Shema. Wrote Salomar, even if you come home earlier, you shouldn't recite it yet until it says, learn ad yitzias hakochavim, v'yikari kriya shema, v'yispal v'achkach yoichal, and only eat after you davened and let kriya shema. The kivin the chazinon, that filu kishiyava kodim zmana. So even we saw that they came home before it says, he might be negligent. It's a cross all. We make you read all the shanas kadesh yispalal miyad. Shamin and the divrei kol shetzarech lechatchil cross miyad b'tzias hakochavim. It sounds like everybody holds that you should read Kriya Shema right after it says. Upluktai hu, the machlokas between Rav Gamliel and the Chacham lo havi ela b'di'evet. Chacham yisrilu dafilu b'di'evet enu yotze ela chatzos. That you're going to be yotze only up until chatzos. After chatzos, you're not going to be yotze. It's mishum siag. Rav Gamliel srilu b'di'evet yotze kol halayim. So let's see how the Shulchan Aruch is going to paskin. He has three opinions to go by. He has the Rashba, which seems to be that you could delay it until Alos. The Rambam says you have to read it right. Rabbeinu Yonah said you should do it right after it says. So the Chacham know that one may not recite Shema after, even in the Evid situation. And Rabbi Gamliel holds that you can recite until dawn. The Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah, that one should recite Shema immediately after it says HaKochavim, and that the proper time extends until midnight. If one recited it later, the Shulchan Aruch rules, though, that one still has fulfilled the mitzvah b'di'evet. This is Orach Chaim Reish Lamed Hey. L'chadchila tzarech likros Kriya Shema miyad b'tzeis HaKochavim. Uzman ad chatzi halayla. L'chadchila, you should read it only until chatzos. But if you read it, as long as you read it before Alos, you fulfilled your obligation. The Mishnah Berurah writes that although the ideal time to recite Kriya Shema is immediately it says Kachavim according to Shulchan Aruch, delaying until any time before midnight is not forbidden. And it seems like the Mishnah Berurah is disagreeing with the opinion of Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. Ad chatzi halayla, Peirush, Rabbanan Godru, they made a geder, she'asur lis'acher b'Kriya Shema b'yoyser mechatzos. Don't delay until after chatzos, shelo de michshol. As example, the imis'acher, if he did late, if he was late, mikri oivra al derech chachamim, you violated the Divrei Chacham. Aval ad chatzos leka isura imisacher. Elashon rezoris. Normally, zrizin magdimim lemitzvos. So you want to be a zoris, you should do it right after it says. But there's no isur if you waited. But this is talking about is sitting and not eating or doing some kind of work. The ilu ochel osik b'melacha matredes kahisim and Reish Lamed Beis midina osir mishigiz man Kriya Shema. You're not really supposed to eat or engage in work once the time for Kriya Shema arrives. So first you should say Kriya Shema, then you should get involved in those activities. What he's saying is, in general, you would have no reason why you're delaying your Kriya Shema until Chatzos. On the other hand, it seems that delaying Kriya Shema until after midnight does constitute a transgression on some level. So given that, Rav Ben Zion Abishol writes that one should not do so, even in order to daven with a minyan. It's better, better to daven by yourself, and say Kriya Shema as part of that Ma'ariv by yourself rather than a minyan, then to go to a minyan after Chatzos, because you're violating this principle that was elucidated. In the footnote there, he explains that even if a person already recited Kriya Shema, he should not wait until after midnight in order to recite the Amida with the minyan. As l'chatchila, one must also recite the Amida before midnight. He does not cite a source for this assertion, though in fact Achronim dispute the issue. Pri Megadim is lenient, the Eliyahu Rabbah rules stringently. Back to the text. Although such a scenario of finding a minyan late at night may sound implausible, in truth, Chatzos in the winter can be as early as 11:25 p.m. in Israel and 11:40 in New York. Therefore, one should be cognizant of this issue when attending a very late Ma'ariv minyan at a minyan factory or at the kotel. We have seen that one who did not recite Kriya Shema before midnight should still do so afterwards until dawn. The Gemara also quotes a view that it's possible to fulfill the mitzvah of the nighttime Kriya Shema after dawn until Netzach Hama. And in case of need, that view is accepted. If you're traveling or something, for some reason you didn't say Shema, and you can say it up until Netz. Tanya Rav Shimon Yochai Oimer, Mishum Rabbi Kiva Pamim Shalom Kor Kriya Shema Shtei Pamim Bayom. Achas Korim HaNetzach Hama, Achas Lacha Netzach Hama. If you hold that really a day starts by Alois HaShachar, he's pointing out that there might be days where you said Kriya Shema twice, one before Netz, one after Netz. The one before Netz is fulfilling the previous night's chiyuv. You just, if you're going to say Ma'ariv, you shouldn't say Hashkivenu. It's not appropriate in the morning. We never heard him say it clearly in the yeshiva. We deduced it from something that we learned from them. What was that they did? Who's Zugad Rabbanan? There were a pair of Chachamim, the Ishtakar Bilula, the braid Rav Yeshua ben Levi. Rav Yeshua ben Levi made a wedding for his son. They got drunk. Also, Rav Yeshua ben Levi Omar, Kedai Rav Shimon Lismoch La B'Shas Adchak. By the time they woke up, Alos had already passed. So that's when Rav Yeshua ben Levi said, you can rely on Rav Shimon, who said that up until Netz of the next day, you could really recite Kriya Shema. And the Shulchan Aruch rules that way. According to Kriya Shema Shel Arvis, Achar Sha'ala Amud HaShachar, if it's after Alois of the next day, it's before sunrise, Kodem HaNetzach Hama, Lo Yotze Yidei Chavoso Elim Kenaya Onus. There's some kind of accident, if he was drunk, he was sick, you should not recite Ma'ariv with Ashkivenu. The Kivin Sha'alam HaShachar Ein Zman Shchiva. It's not the time of going to sleep. Says the Ramah. Aval Shara Brachos. Dahainu Shnaim Shalifnei Kriya Shema Birchas Emes V'Munah Ashkivenu Oimer. But you do say the other brachos of Ma'ariv. The example in the Gemara of exigent circumstances in which the nighttime Kriya Shema may be said after dawn was of people who were drunk at the time of Kriya Shema. The Aruch HaShulchan discusses whether this applies to people who started drinking after the time for Kriya Shema had already started. Let's say they started after Tseis. Maybe you have to consider such people as negligent, and we don't give them till dawn. He writes, though, that lack of intent to become drunk is treated as exigent circumstances, even if one became intoxicated. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, Hakor Kriya Shema Shel Arvis Achar Sha'ala Amud HaShachar, someone who davened Ma'ariv after Alos, Lo Yotze Yidei Chovaso Elim Kenaya Onus. There was some kind of exigent circumstance. He's quoting the Shulchan. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, Davka Shehizchil Lishto is Kodim Shegizman Kriya Shema. He must have started drinking before it says. If he starts afterwards, where he should have not drunk and recited Kriya Shema immediately after it says, he's Reinei Yachol Likros. However, Yeshmi Shemegam Kim said the Elio Rabbah disagrees. The Taz is who he quotes, who says that if you're a posher, you shouldn't be given the right to do it. The Elio Rabbah says, why not? V'zeu vadai. Afilu yitzchi lishtos achar shegizman kriyashma. V'rak shelo al das l'shtaker. He didn't have intent to get drunk. V'irish nishtaker gam ken makri on. He says, called anoinus. He quotes the Magen Avraham. What about the proper, or page 332? The proper order for Ma'ariv when one arrives late. So we all know, we learned it in volume 9, we learned that latecomers to Shachris skip parts of Psuki de Zimra to daven the Amida together with the Tzibur. But there's no option to skip Kriyat Shema or its brachos, as it's more important to daven the Amida immediately after the bracha of Gal Yisrael, in order to juxtapose the Amida to the redemption, which is Smichas Gula L'Tfilah. The Amoraim dispute whether the Amida of Ma'ariv should also be juxtaposed to the bracha of Gal Yisrael. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's view is that this is not necessary, as the main redemption from Egypt took place during the day, not at night. The halacha follows the dissenting view of Rabbi Yochanan, and ideally we do recite the Amida immediately after the brachos of Kriyat Shema. However, we already saw above that the Rashba writes in the name of Rav Hai Gaon that if the congregation recites Ma'ariv before the time for Kriyat Shema, one should recite the Amida with them and recite the brachos of Kriyat Shema later, without concern that one is not juxtaposing the Amida to the theme of Geula. At Ma'ariv, this juxtaposition not as critical. Praying together with the congregation, the Amida takes precedence. Elsewhere, the Rashba explains that this ruling of Rav Hai Gaon applies only to Ma'ariv. At Shachris, juxtaposing the theme of redemption to the Amida is more important than davening with a minyan, with which we discussed. The Shulchan Aruch applies the same logic to a latecomer who arrives in shul in Ma'ariv time, when they're about to start the Shemona Esrei. According to the Shulchan Aruch, you should recite the Amida with them in such a case, even though he hasn't said Kriyat Shema, the brachos of Gal Yisrael yet. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Matzat Tzibur Shekor Kriyat Shema V'rotzim Lamed B'Tfilah. He came into shul. They already daven Kriyat Shema. The Tzibur is not going to daven Shemona Esrei. The Yachid should yispalel imon, and then backwards read the two brachos prior to Shema, read the Shema and then the brachos afterwards. We learn in volume 11, Shir 5, that if the congregation has already started the Amid of Shachris or Mincha when the latecomer arrives, the latecomer should estimate whether starting the Amida will prevent them from joining the congregation for Kedusha or Moedim. What is the halacha with respect to Ma'ariv? At Ma'ariv, there is no Chazor Sashatz, and neither Kedusha nor Moedim are relevant. However, the Shulchan Aruch writes that a latecomer must also estimate whether starting his Amida will prevent him from answering to the Kaddish at the end of the Shemona Esrei. Anichnas lebeis hakneses, umatzat tzibur mispalalim. Im yochol lahaskir v'ligma kodem shegish shlich tzibur l'kedusha l'kaddish ispalel. So by Ma'ariv, there's no kedusha, but there is a kaddish. So if he thinks he can finish Shemona Esrei before the chazan is going to finish and start kaddish, he should start it. But ve'im lav al yispalel imein hasha oiveres. He should not start unless the zman of Ma'ariv is going to be missed, but that's going to be pretty rare. The Magen Avraham explains that the requirement to estimate whether Kaddish will be missed is relevant specifically at Ma'ariv, because at Shachris and Mincha, Kaddish is not said immediately after Chazaras Hashatz. There's a delay. You have Tachanun, then you say Chatzi Kaddish, and Kaddish Tiskabel isn't said until Asher Val Tzion. Once the latecomer has finished his Shemona Esrei, he must recite Kriyat Shema and the brachos immediately without interruption. Rav Ephraim Greenblatt, the Rivavos Ephraim, who was a Talmid Muvak of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who lived in Memphis. And I was zocheh to meet him a number of times in Los Angeles and to visit him in his home. He lived in Beit Bagan, right near Rabbi Gottesman. And he recently passed away. The Rivavos Ephraim are 10 volumes or 12 volumes, major Shilas and Shuvas, practical questions. So Rav Ephraim Greenblatt proves from the source case of the congregation who davens early that one is not required to recite Shema immediately, and he quotes Rav Moshe Feinstein as agreeing. Bedor Sha'altecha, concerning your question, Mishnas Acher came late. V'yispal Shmona Esrei Shel Ma'ariv im Hatzibur Lifnei Kriyas Shema. He joined the Tzibur with Shmona Esrei and had not recited Kriyas Shema. Im muter lo l'daber ben Shmona Esrei l'Ma'ariv. He's going to have to go back and start the brachos of Kriyas Shema. Can he speak? Achar kach sharati l'moiri v'Rabbi Arav Agon Rav Moshe Feinstein. So the Rivos Ephraim said he asked his Rebbe, V'amar li sheyochel lafsik ben Shmona Esrei l'ben Kriyas Shema. He's allowed to be mafsik. Sho'omer achrei Shmona Esrei. Why? V'araya demispalim koidim v'achar kach bizman ha'omer Kriyas Shema v'lo kosuv sholafsik. People would daven early, then they would say Kriyas Shema after it says. No one says that he should be quiet until he does that. In Kenu Kamosha Shekasavna Demuter Lafsik Bedibur. So he uses that as a proof that even when you're right there after you finish your Shemona Esrei, you can speak. The Rashba addresses another common question relating to interrupting between Geula and Tefillah at Mariv, namely, whether one may remind the congregation to include any seasonal additions to the Amidah, like Mashiv Haruach, the Saint Talamotar, or it's Rosh Chodesh. The Rashba answers that announcing Rosh Chodesh between Kaddish and the Amidah of Mariv is not at all problematic. Masha Noagim Be'eretz Azos, the Leil Rosh Chodesh, the night of Mariv going into Rosh Chodesh, Shemakri Shliach Tzibur Ben Kaddish L'Tfilas Ravish Rosh Chodesh. The Gabbai would say Yalav Yovo or Rosh Chodesh. Should we protest? Is it a hafsaka? Tshuva. In Roy Limchos, you don't have to protest. Think about when you say Natilas Yadayim and you say, bring the salt, right? We said that's not a hefsek because it's part and parcel of the thing. So here the same thing. And something that is Tzarech L'Tfila, it's not a hefsek.
We have the same question, famous question on Rosh Hashanah and Musaf, Kiyas Shofar. So, for example, Kiyas Shofar, and we clap on the table and say Kohanim Leviim, right?
It's the same. It's Tzarech Tefillah.
Exactly.
It's Tzarech Tefillah. It's Tzarech Tefillah. You're saying because we're noig not to speak with between the first blowing and the last blowing.
So there you have there.
You're not supposed to speak anytime in Shemona Esrei during Shliach, during the Shliach.
No, but I'll comment even more so on Rosh Hashanah, because you have the extra issue of Kiyas Shofar, and people are very, very scrupulous about it.
But most hold that after the first 10 blowings,
don't tell anyone that. Don't tell anyone that.
Yeah, I'm just saying. No, what I wanted to say, Chaim, is better than anybody that Gadol Avono means so. The Mishnah Berurah says, Gadol Avono means so. A person who speaks during Shliach Tzibur, his sin is so great that it cannot be forgiven. Mm-hmm. You don't have to come on to Kiyas Shofar. When you clap during Chazor Shaf Muslim and say Kohanim Leviim, it's the same thing, but you're allowed to do it because it's Tzarech Tefillah. In a kanami, it's a halachas kavakama with the Kiyas Shofar and stuff.
So the question is, we don't say. So you can say that in Mariv time, you can say after Kaddish, you can clap and you can say Yalav Yavo, right? But in Shachris, we don't do that. Gal Yisrael, we're silent. Nobody ever does that.
Because here is first of all, think about what's going on, Chaim. We say Gol Yisrael Ma'ariv, then you have Ashkivenu, and then we Ashkenazim have Baruch Hashem Lo'olam Amen V'Amen.
Okay, fine. But you have a Kaddish, right?
In the morning, Baruch Hashem Gol Yisrael, and you go into Shemon Esrei.
Okay, so why can't you say Yalav Yavo at that point? Is that a hefsek? Nobody does it. Nobody does it.
Because that's more, this leniency we're bringing is only by Ma'ariv, not by.
But Ernie,
Because we gave an explanation.
but hold on.
Because the Iker Yitzia was in the daytime.
But you said Tzarech Tefillah, right? Tzarech Tefillah, you have an opening, but no, even though it's Tzarech Tefillah, we still don't do it.
But Chaim, you don't do the middle of Kedusha. You wait until after Kedusha before you clap and you say Kohan. You still pick your place.
It's the best time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And doing it.
But when you clap, I would say it's much better than clapping than it would be to say Yalav Yavo.
I know, but you have to do it before. You cannot wait until Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. If you want to do it, maybe between and Elokim Zulatecha and Ezra's Ha'olam, whatever that is. Perhaps there's a
So before Tzur Yisrael, the Chazan could say clap and say Yalav Yavo.
Perhaps, yes. That could be like your Kohanim Leviim.
Okay.
Ein roy limchois. Uvadinu to call davar shetzarach letfila. Ein bo mishum hefsek. You know, the Rashba could be taken as far as you want to take him, and he could maybe even somebody who says Gal Yisrael. We're not knowing to do that, but he says it's not a hafsaka if you yell out Yalav Yov. So you're not mafsik. So maybe we're machmir there because of the Iker Yitzia was in the daytime. But it's a question to ask based on this Rashba. We follow the Rashba in so many areas.
Footnote 20. Footnote 20.
Yaakov Yellen and I traveled to Spain together with Mark Shapiro, Professor Mark Shapiro. And when we were in Rashba lived in Barcelona. And whenever he took us in Toledo, he talked about the Rosh, and in Gerona, he talked about the Ramban. So whatever city he deals with, he brought us so many truvas of the Rashba that the OU, that American halacha follows in kashrus, in minhagim, and unbelievable. Like the biggest rishon in terms of who we follow in all the various truvas he has. So the Rashba says, it's often a Rashba. Ein bo mishum hefsek. So it is noteworthy that the Rashba doesn't appear to restrict to Ma'ariv, but merely writes that regarding Ma'ariv, there's an additional reason to allow the interruption. The Prima Godim does write that the announcement should not be made at chakras, and that's the generally accepted practice. So that's the Prima Godim. We're not going to go against the Prima Godim. So he must have learned in the Rashba that the leniency only extends to Ma'ariv. Okay, fascinating. Ukramir meberchas halechem, tol bruch, ain't no hefsek. Go and say the bracha, bring the salt. The kosherkin zeh, shu tzarachat tefillah mamish, shlo yitu. People should make a mistake. Lo yaskira ma'or b'tefillah, right? If you forget to say Eliyahu Yavot on Rosh Chodesh in the daytime, at least, you have to repeat. That's very interesting. You could have a svara to say, because if it's Rosh Chodesh and you forgot to say Yalav Yavot at night, you don't have to repeat Shemon Esrei. Special din. Why? Because there was no Kiddush HaChodesh at night. Say the Poskei Halacha. So if you forgot to say Yalav Yavot at night, by Ma'ariv it's more lenient. You don't have to repeat, which would be a svara sort of against the Rashba that you don't necessarily have to yell out. But he wants you to say it lechatchila because that's the me'ena ma'ura is important. Kol sheken b'tfilas arvi shu b'shus. He says it's even more reason to be lenient because tfilas arvi is a rishus. Nobody protests. Sefer Amanig. writes in the name of the Gaonim that it's even acceptable for the Chazan to repeat Baruch Hu before the Amida for the benefit of latecomers who missed the first Baruch Hu. However, he writes that one may do so only during Ma'ariv, when the requirement to put Geula to Tefillah is not as strict. Meaning, it sounds like they would do the Baruch Hu like right before the Kaddish. So again, it's saying since it's not that important that the Geula be Somech to Tefillah at night, you could stick a Baruch Hu in there as well. I've never seen that. We see the Baruch Hu is said after Aleinu, right? Or maybe, maybe before maybe before Aleinu, depends on the meaning of the shul, but it's said after Shemona Esrei, not before Shemona Esrei. Somebody comes after Baruch Hu. Now, if the Shliach Tzibur doesn't say Baruch Hu until after davening is over, you can't say Baruch Hu between Gal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei to be in and tekef l'Gula Tefillah. Aval ba'arvis, the kaimelon Tefillah Arvis Rishus. Number one, it's not a choifa. Ukvarnu mafsikin ben Gula Tefillah. We're already saying a lot of other things, including Kaddish, between Gal Yisrael at night and Shemona Esrei. Bepsukim shetiknu banchim marav v'mahalach yachal omer lem Baruch Hu. So he says, you can say Baruch Hu for them as well at that time. V'hudanu Baruch Hashem v'mevorach. V'mesadik kriya shema tiknu chachamim b'shtayim l'fanei v'shtayim l'achreya. Aval im la'achar Baruch Hu boi miyad. If they came immediately after Baruch Hu, v'lo posach ha'chazan b'yoytzer or, v'heim lo pirsu shema, they didn't start saying the brachos. Yachzer v'yomer lem Baruch Hu. He says he could say another Baruch Hu for them. V'yifreshu al shma, then they should sit and say the brachos. That's actually the better way of putting the praises of Hashem in order. But if they've already said the Kriya Shema, then he shouldn't say Baruch. The Shulchan Aruch accepts both of these rulings, that one may announce to the congregation immediately before the Amida to include Yalav Yavo, and he can recite Baruch Hu for the benefit of latecomers. You shouldn't speak between Gal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei. Vafa noagim lomer yudches psukim, which is the Baruch Hashem lo olam amen ve'amen ve'yiru einenu. Ein lafsik ben yiru einenu l'tfila. You also Baruch HaMelech b'chvodo sheyim l'chalenu v'akol masa. You shouldn't speak. Umiu mashamach b'shliach tzibur rosh chodesh ben Kaddish. He finished Kaddish, and the Gabbai says, Yalav Yavla, l'tfila service, lo avi hefsek, given shu tzorach hatfila. V'chein yachal loimer Baruch Hu. You can say Baruch Hu then. Lo tzim mishalo shama, lo avi hefsek. This allowance, the footnote says, is not usually practiced today. The Chazan will, however, sometimes recite Baruch Hu, like we said, after Aleinu, for anyone who may have missed the regular recitation of Baruch Hu. In many communities in Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hu is recited at the end of Ma'ariv as a normative practice. The Magen Avraham, one of the super commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, questions whether the leniency to announce Yalav Yavo, right, additions to the Amida applies to all such additions, or only to those whose omission would require repetition of the Amida. He concludes that the accepted practice is to allow all such announcements. Maybe Rosh Chodesh, which is biblical, we make him repeat the Shemona Esrei, we didn't say it. Or, for example, HaMelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat. If you didn't say the Ala Nisim, maybe there the Gabbai shouldn't clap and say Ala Nisim. He says, even in the Magen Avraham's time, the custom was to announce. In his Siddur, nearly the Ben Aprakim, Dinan Kamo B'Shachris, between the prokim of Arvis, like between Vayayim Shamoa and the Parsha of Tzitzis, the din is the same like a Shachmas, the Davka Ben Gulul and Philly Yesh Makilin. It's only between Goy Yisrael and Shemona Esrei that they're making Ma'ariv. Bishum Mitfil Zarvis Rishus, when Kriya Shema V'choseh Choy V'Lukul Alma. But reciting Kriya Shema and its brachas is an obligation, so therefore you should not be mafsik there. The Mishnah Brura, Patskins like the Magen Avraham, that a reminder immediately before the Amidah to include one of the additions is always permitted at Ma'ariv, since the reminder is considered necessary for the tefillah. In some communities, the custom is to be more stringent and not to announce aloud anything at Ma'ariv before the Amidah. And the Piskei Tshuva quotes that. Uverabim me'abatek knesiyos eino agim klal ba'achrozes. Ela hashamish makal hashulchan l'pnei shmona esrei l'zichron al askos ben amura. The Gabbai gives a clap and that's it. Doesn't say anything. Like some of us do. If nobody announced it, somebody who's davening Shmona Esrei silently, when he gets to Yali V'yov, says it a little louder. We see that minig as well. Reciting Baruch Hashem La'olam after Ashkivenu. So, minag Ashkenaz here in America is we say Baruch Hashem La'olam Amen V'Amen after Ashkivenu. Of course, those of us, when we travel to Eretz Yisrael, we see the Nusach there is not. I don't care what minig you're in. Maybe in the Gra they do it. I don't think even in the Gra they do it. Okay, we'll see what the basis of this machlokas is. In many communities, an extra bracha is recited in Ma'ariv, between the bracha of Gal Yisrael and the Amidah. This bracha did not exist in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, but was added subsequently. The Gaonim discussed the permissibility of adding this bracha, the reasons for it, with one of the earliest sources being the following tshuva of Rav Natranai Gaon, quoted by Rav Amram Gaon. The Gaonim lived 800, 900, up to 1,000 in Iraq, in Old Bavel, in Sura and Pumbedisa. Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Sadia Gaon, it was the period of the Gaonim. And Rav Amram Gaon and his Machzer appeared maybe somewhere between the year 1000 and 1200. So that Machzer quoted Rav Natranai Gaon, saying, Shalom Makami Rav Natranai B'Leil Shabbos B'Brachos Achronish B'Kriyas Shema, in the Brachos of Kriyas Shema, Omer Baruch Hashem La'olam K'shar Yemosachol or Omer V'Shamra. They asked him about Friday. Do you say Baruch Hashem La'olam? Medivrei Chazal Bracha Zoena Kol Iker. Chazal didn't have this bracha. Ki bracha chamishis. Right? We have two brachas before Kriyas Shema, and we have two brachas after. We say Gal Yisrael, and we say Ashkivenu. Shomer Amo Yisrael Loat. So that's 4. So he says this 5th bracha didn't exist. Lishmuel Domer Alocha Kedivra Omer Choiva. According to Shmuel, who said that Ma'ariv is an obligation, Basar Shomer Yisrael Altu Samchin and Tefillah. Shomer Yisrael is Hashkivenu. You have to do Shmon Esrei immediately after. Ularab the Amar Allah Kedivra Amar Rishus Paskinim B'Kadisha. Rav says that Ma'ariv is only voluntary. We put a Kaddish in between the Hashkivenu and the Shmona Esrei. Now, we know we always paskin like Rav. Even the Hilchasei Kavasa de Rav the Amar Rishus. Also Basroi, later authorities came to Tikinu Basar Shomer Yisrael L'Meimer Psuka de Ispei Shvachos Uzmiras. They came up with this 5th bracha of Baruch Hashem La'olam, the Kavan Damar Psuki Takinu Basrayu bracha. Since we're citing brachas, there's a final bracha. Hamelech Michvodo Tamid Machalein Lam Ve'eva Kol Masa. That's the 5th bracha of Ma'ariv. Rav Notrona explains that since Ma'ariv is voluntary, we don't have to be particular about doing this Amida and Geula. This is why we say Kaddish in between. And for the same reason, adding extra verses on a bracha is not problematic. Tosfos offers some suggestions as to why these verses were added. Tekinu lomar zeh, shebetoch kach yispal chaver gam hu, v'lo yelech b'veis haknesses ad shishmor kol echad tfiloso. It was a way people came late to shul. So we don't want people to be stuck in shul alone late. Everybody is left and they're there and they have to walk home at night with bandits. So we lengthened the tefillah, so we homogenized it so that everyone will end up at the same time. There are 18 mentions of Hashem's name. Keneged Yudches Brachos to Shmona Esrei. The Orchas Chaim writes in the name of the Rashba that since Ma'ariv is voluntary, the verses of Baruch Hashem the Olam were instituted as a replacement for the Amida, for one who decides not to daven. The Kaddish, which follows this bracha, signals the end of the mandatory part of Ma'ariv, which is only Kriya Shema and its brachos. Right? Mishum de Igba Alocha Tefillah Sarvis Rishus, right? Tefillah means Shmona Esrei. So it's not obligatory. So you don't have to say it. Umafsikin b'Kaddish Damashma de Gomra Kol. That's why there's a Kaddish there in the first place. It's as if you finished your tefillah. Somebody wants to be Yotzei, his Shmona Esrei, by reciting these psukim that have 18 names of Hashem in it. Wow, interesting svar. The Avodram notes that the Ritz Gaius and the Rambam objected to adding this bracha, but that the common practice is to say it. Havrav Yitzchak ben Gaius, the Ritz Gaius, cause of the law in bracha Hashem loyla. Bishum de boilam ismech geulah tefillah. He has a problem because of the geulah tefillah. Chen cause of a Rambam. For no geulah amru mineg avosenu Torah. So the Rambam here says it's a custom to say it, and mineg avosenu biyadin. Other Rishonim quoted as not having said this bracha include the Rashbam, the Ramban. Although the Rambam is quoted above as objecting to the added bracha in his order of prayer for the whole year, he includes two versions of an elongated second bracha following Kriya Shema from Ma'ariv. This bracha combines the bracha of Ashkivenu with some of the verses of Baruch Hashem Le'olam, and most Yemenite communities recite this form of the bracha even today. The Shulchan Aruch quoted above in source 39 mentions those who have the minhag of reciting the extra bracha without commenting on whether this custom is dominant or whether it should be continued. However, it appears that among Sephardim, the custom died out gradually, and today the majority of Sephardic communities do not say this bracha. See Halacha Brura, where Rav David Yosef cites some Sephardic poskim, who note that the custom in Eretz Yisrael and some other Sephardic lands were not to say it, including the Knesset Agdola, which was the Tshuva M'Rabanan. Rav Aaron Azulai and the Levush and Eretz Chaim. By contrast, for hundreds of years, all Ashkenazi communities did recite this bracha. The Gra did not say it, but his community did. Das Rashbam Ramban Ikir, which that we quoted the Rashbam the Ramban as saying that they don't say it. So the Gra agrees with that. But the Meiser Rav, which brought down various minhagim of the Gra, says, "Hu atzmolaya oimer klal lo baruch Hashem lo shamru b'Shabbos." He didn't say v'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos either, because it's an impediment l'smach geulah tefillah avalat tzibur she'etzlo v'shem tzibur you oimrim. However, when the students of the Gra moved to Eretz Yisrael in the 19th century, they started new congregations and did not say Baruch Hashem La'olam. This is the reason why today virtually all congregations in Eretz Yisrael did not recite this bracha, whereas Ashkenazi congregations outside Eretz Yisrael continued to say it. Many congregations who daven Nusach Sfard, even outside Eretz Yisrael, do not recite the bracha of Baruch Hashem La'olam. Ashkenazim visiting Eretz Yisrael, who usually recite Baruch Hashem La'olam at home, will likely not have the time to do so in congregations where it's not said. In such situations, there's no need to say this bracha after the tefillah. See the Igros Moshe and the Mishnah Berurah. What about women and Ma'ariv? We discussed women's obligation for tefillah in detail in volume 11. As we saw there, Rishonim and Achronim disagree whether women are obligated in reciting only a short tefillah every day or in reciting the Amidah of Shachris and Mincha. However, as noted there, the Mishnah Berurah writes that all opinions agree women are not obligated to recite Ma'ariv, since, as we learned in this year, Ma'ariv was not always entirely obligatory for men either. According to Tosfos, Ma'ariv was always obligatory under normal circumstances. V'chol zel inyan Shachris u'Mincha, that women, there's a machlokas. About tefillas arvish rishus, aval pishachshav kvar kiblu aleim kol Yisrael l'choiva. Even though men and all of Israel have accepted Ma'ariv as an obligation, the women didn't accept it. The Ruban ein mispalel arvis. The majority of them don't daven Ma'ariv. Today as well, the Halichot Bat Yisrael notes that most women do not generally recite Ma'ariv, though he writes that some opinions do require them to recite at least part of it. Arvish tfilas rishus anoshim lo kablu aleim. The Ruban eina mispalos v'yesh hasarvim shechayavos af ba'arvis. See the Aruch HaShulchan, who writes that it's difficult to explain why they do not recite all three tefillos daily. Also, the Kaf HaChaim writes that women who know how to read customarily do recite all three tefillos daily. The Halichos Bas Yisrael notes that some hold that women would recite specifically Emes V'Emunah, since according to these opinions, women are obligated in mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim both in the day and at night. He therefore writes that if one wishes to recite Ma'ariv but cannot recite the whole thing, she should recite Emes V'Emunah Shkivenu and the Shmona Esrei. According to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a woman who regularly recites Ma'ariv may recite Shachris twice the next day, meaning if she missed the Ma'ariv, as Tashlumim. If she's unable to recite Ma'ariv one evening. Says the Alicha Shloimoi, Isha Noihagas Lispal Arvis Bikfias, a woman who's accepted upon herself to daven Ma'ariv every night. V'shachal Lispal, and she forgot. Mistaber she'ein tzrich lashlim b'shachris. She's not required to be mashlim. Aval muteres lahachmer latzmo lashlim. She's allowed to be machmer herself and say two Shmona Esreis the next morning. Okay. So next week, we're going to start, God willing, volume 16, Hilchos Shabbos. We will start with this Kriya Shema Alamita. It's one little seif. We won't finish it tonight if we start it. So we'll stop here. We'll start with this final Kriya Shema Alamita, and that's how we'll finish volume 15. And then we'll start 16. I wish everybody a Shavua Tov and a good Shabbos. Any questions, comments, ha'aros?
Ernie, if you recall,